All right, guys. Sound doctrine produces a sound mind. If you don't have sound doctrine, then you can't have a sound mind. Now, God says He has not given us a spirit of fear, but of a sound mind. Well, like I said, this goes along with sound doctrine. If you're being gaslighted by the so-called Watchmen community for a rapture every feast day, every couple weeks, every blood moon, every eclipse, it's because they don't have the revelation. They don't have it, and they're really shooting in the wind, just taking pot shots. But I have the revelation. I'm not boasting, but I do. This is what all of those so-called watchmen miss. They missed it, okay? Jesus Christ started His ministry 25 to 26 AD. Okay, that's almost 2,000 years ago. He started His ministry on a Shemitah year. Okay, the Shemitah is the Sabbath year. The Hebrew calendar uses 7-year cycles. And it has to do with the agricultural cycles. And on the 7th year, it is called the year of release. And it is the year that they let the soil rest. Hence, the 7,000th year, after this 6,000 years is fulfilled, is the year of the millennial reign of Christ, or rest. Okay? So Christ started His ministry on the 7th year, the Shemitah year, the sabbatical. And His ministry went for about 3.5 years of the 7-year cycle. And Christ was crucified and rose from the dead in 29 or 30 AD. I leave a little give or take with the 2 years. Okay, it was probably 30 AD, but possibly 29 AD. Okay, regardless, that's where we're at. 3.5 years. Now, the next 3.5 years, Christ was not on earth. In fact, God gave Israel a year to repent, and they did not repent. And during this time, the Apostle Paul was a type and shadow of the Antichrist, because Paul went around persecuting Christians for about 3.5 years. So he was a type and shadow of the Antichrist after Christ. But then he got saved, and he became the writer, the penner of 13 to 14 books. Now, knowing this, that Christ took the first half of the 7-year cycle, knowing this, now we look at our time right now. The Antichrist is going to mimic Christ. He is going to be a mimic. He is called the morning star. Jesus Christ is called the bright morning star. And you'll only see these differences that are very important in the King James Bible, because a lot of other Bibles call them both the morning star, and that is not correct. However, you have to understand that everything the Antichrist does is a counterfeit. Anti actually also means counterfeit Christ, in place of Christ. Now, the reason that it is impossible for a pre-7-year rapture is because that time is come and gone already. The 7 years, the 7-year cycle started last year, 2022, in April or late March. I can't remember when Nissan 1 exactly was, but it was in April or March last year. And we are now 1.5 years into the 7 years. That's why these guys have no idea what to do. So they're looking at every single feast day and saying, this is it, there's a time, you're ready to meet the Lord. Steve Fletcher, Repo Man 64, this is my last video, I'll see you in heaven, all this stuff, okay? Barry All, especially Aaron from God a Minute, horrible, just horrible, it's gaslighting. Remember I said, sound doctrine produces a sound mind. They're making people like the people that were going to Hellbop Comet. You know, the Marshall Applewhite. All right, guys, this is it. Let's get our new shoes, and we're going to drink the punch and catch a ride on the Nishihiru Comet that's going through the Revelation 12 sign this month. That's how they are. They're gaslighting you. Okay, they don't have the revelation. They're not acknowledging this. And this is why the rapture didn't happen in the beginning of a 7-year period. Because if you go back in time, Jesus Christ took that first 3.5 years. And now the Antichrist will mimic that. So Christ started in 25-26 AD. The Antichrist ministry will start in 2025 or 2026 AD. Right in the middle of the Shemitah. So 2025, 2026 is in the middle of this last 7 years. Like I said, it started in 2022. And the end will be 2029, 2030. So it's a mirror. So if we attach the time of the Antichrist to right after Christ, that's how it would be. It would have been the last half of the 7-year cycle after Christ. But now it's also the last half of the Shemitah. You see? The last half of the 7 years back then, and now it's just 2,000 years later, but it's the last half. Not the first half. Not the first half. They're looking for it at the first half. They thought there was a rapture. It's impossible. Now, if we go 20 times 25, it's 500. 2025. The number 500 in the Strong's Concordance Greek is Antichrist. You can't argue with that. 2025 is also the year of the snake. The serpent in the garden. Nakash. Nakash actually means the shining one. Not a literal snake. So do you see what they are missing? This huge piece to the puzzle. They were looking for the Antichrist in the beginning of the 7-year cycle. But Christ was the beginning of the 7-year cycle 2,000 years ago. The Antichrist will take the last half of the 7 years, which today, 2,000 years ago, is 2025, 2026 to 2029. Do you see this? This is what they are missing. It's a mirror. 2,000-year-old mirror. And like I said, 2025 is the year of the snake. The Antichrist. So when is the rapture? When would it make most sense for the rapture to happen? Well, like I said, the 7-year cycle started in 2022 around March or April. Today we are a year and a half later in 2023 in September. So that's about a year and a half into the last 7 years. So the whole 7-year cycle only has 5.5 years left. So this idea of a pre-7-year cycle is impossible. Now they're looking all at this month at the Feast of Trumpets, which is a year and a half into the 7-year cycle. Okay? But it makes no sense. The rapture doesn't make very much sense. Not no sense, but doesn't make very much sense to happen this month. A year and a half in. I don't see any patterns for that. But what I do see one pattern for is 2 years in, which would be 2024, 2 years in, around April Passover. Okay, around that time. Because if we go back to Genesis chapter 45, which is 20 plus 25, interesting, there was a great deliverance 2 years into the 7-year famine. And they went up to their father's house. My guess is that that great deliverance was at the time of Passover. Because that's every time you read about Passover, they go up into the city. Even when the dead rose rose from the graves around Passover, they went up into the city. So, thousands of years ago at the Great Deliverance, they went up to their Father's house. Same pattern. So that is a possibility. 2 years into the 7 years. But the other possibility is 3 to 3.5 years into the 7 years, right in the middle, 2025. Because that is when Christ ascended, which he is the man-child. Now we are the man-child in pattern. And I've shown a lot of information on and patterns and numbers and the Strong's Concordance and all kinds of things why I think it's 2025. But the earliest that it makes any sense is 2024 around Passover, which is 2 years into the 7-year famine. It's a pattern from Genesis 45. And again, in Genesis 45, it's interesting because if you go to Genesis 49, it's like 2029. And they all come down, and then you have Genesis 50, which is like 2030. And it's all a mirror. It's all a pattern. And 50 is a jubilee. There's 50 years in a jubilee. So there's 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. So it's like the chapters are lining up with the years. And in Genesis, all you have to do is add the years. 20 plus 25 is 45. 20 plus 26 is 46, which is Genesis chapter 46, and so on. The years are matching up with the events and all these things. You just have to see the code and the patterns. So again, rapture doesn't make any sense this year. Not to me. A year and a half into the 7 years. Now, one other problem is that the modern Jewish culture changed the new year to September this year, which is at the Feast of Trumpets. And so, this, if you go off the new modernized calendar, this month, Feast of Trumpets would be 2 years into the famine instead of 2024. But that's not the calendar that God is going off of. Okay? So this is only 2 years into the new Jewish change calendar. That's not the biblical calendar. So it's actually a year and a half into it. And it makes no sense for a rapture right now. Could God do a rapture this month? Yeah, but it doesn't make any sense to me. It's highly unlikely in my opinion. The earliest I see it is around Passover 2024. And then on from that. And 2024 is the year of the dragon. And we know Revelation chapter 12 that the dragon was ready to devour the man-child.